sending you love, peace, and unity. This is 90.9 FM Radio Baha'i, WLGI, streaming at radiobaha'i.us. Today we have a special guest with us here, and she is an author, and she is also going to be a part of the TWLUM Gala as the keynote speaker for the event that's coming up August 5th, Mrs. Rose Rock. Mrs. Rock, how you doing?
I am well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being a part of Radio Baha'i to talk to us a little bit about the gala and as well as your book and other projects that you have going on. But before we get started, just for people that may not know you, can you introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Oh, my God. Well, I'm Rose Rock. I'm originally from Andrews, South Carolina. I have the distinction of being the mother of Chris Rock and comedians Tony and Jordan Rock. I am a former educator, and I am an old lady now, but in my 60s, I started writing, and it became something that I should have done years ago, but I really love it, and that's what I do now. I have one book, and I have contributed to others. 90.9
FM Radio Baha'i, TJ Jones. Right now, I'm speaking with Mrs. Rose Rock, the mother of legendary comedian Chris Rock. Mrs. Rock, you talked a little bit about Andrews, growing up in Andrews, South Carolina. What was it like growing up in that area? And also, what was the thought of, going from Andrews, South Carolina and moving to New York City?
Well, the thing is, I grew up in Andrews. Mm-hmm. I grew up in South Carolina in the Jim Crow South.
Right.
So the thing was that as soon as we graduated high school, if you had the ability, you got out. Mm-hmm. So I always tell people that graduation day was Emancipation Day because we graduated if we graduated on Thursday, Saturday, the line at the Reynolds drugstore in Andrews would be a block long because everybody was trying to get up out of there. Mm. And we would all be heading to New York or Philadelphia or wherever. Mm. And the one thing that when I speak to young people, I always tell them, I said, we all had a shoebox. Yeah. And I said, ask me what's in the shoebox. And in the shoebox, we had our lunch because during that time, we were not allowed to get off the bus to eat at the different places they stopped. Mm-hmm. So we would see our white riders get off and go in and sit and have a burger or whatever, but we weren't allowed to do that. And if we did do something, we had to go around the back of the building, which we preferred not to do.
I know that had to be a lot to endure. I hear all these stories about the Jim Crow South, mostly from my grandparents. My grandfather and grandmother, they both grew up in Mississippi, during Jim Crow, and they talk about some of the things that they had to endure, some of the situations you alluded to about the restaurant and, places that were segregated. And, it was really, really tough on African Americans during that time. But, you all persevered. And one thing that you decided to do was move to New York. So my next question for you would be, what was the thought pattern behind moving to New York? Is it something that you always aspire to do? What made you decide to leave South Carolina for New York City?
Well, the thing was, I don't think it was New York per se. It was just getting out of the South. Right. And if you talk to older people, they will tell you that as soon as people got the opportunity to leave, they left. But we didn't even know New York. The saying was, and if you find an older person, you ask them, they will say, oh, so-and-so went up the road. So it was never per se New York or Philadelphia or Chicago. They just went up the road.
That's amazing that, people were taking those chances. You go from, a place that's relatively small in Andrews, South Carolina, and you move to such a huge city. That had to be a little bit nerve-wracking, but you were able to do that, and you were able to spread your wings. And in the process, you actually became an author. So was writing a book something that you always aspired to do? Was that something that you always had in the back of your mind? What was the thought pattern on writing your own book?
You know what happened is I wrote in high school. I wrote and I did a lot of art in high school. And when I came back to my 20th year anniversary, not anniversary, reunion, I remember my English teacher, I read a poem for Margaret Walker, For My People.
Right.
And my teacher said to me, oh my God, I know you wrote that because that's something that you would have written. And I was really kind of angry because I thought, if you knew I had that ability, why didn't you push me? And the thought from her is that at that point, how was she going to push me? Because it was such limited things for people, and especially people like me with no means.
Yeah, that can be tough, when you aspire to do something and unfortunately the stars don't align up. But eventually, for you, it happened and you had an opportunity to write a book. And the name of your book is entitled Mama Rock's Rules, 10 Lessons for Raising a House Full of Successful Children. Now, I learned something about you. I learned that you have 7 biological children and you have 3 adopted children.
Never adopted. They just showed up at my house and never went home.
I know how that goes sometimes, right?
They showed up, so I call them given children.
I understand. Your 3 given children and your 7 biological children, but nonetheless, you write the book and you go in this direction. So what was the thought? To get opportunity to write your very first book and go in this direction and talk a little bit about the children that you raised and not just Chris Rock being successful, but your other children as well.
I think I was being interviewed by Johanna Wilson from the Sun News in Myrtle Beach. And she was, and the questions were, you raised a house full of, you raised boys.
Right.
All these kids in Brooklyn, New York, in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, in the 80s, in the height of the worst crack and drug epidemic in the world.
Yes.
And none of your kids have ever been sent to the principal's office. Nobody has ever been in jail. Nobody has ever done, well, pretty much they all had jobs by the time they were 13. They were all very productive.
Right.
We had a lot of expectations, but we did make them accountable for their actions too. Right. So so she asked me, how did you do that? And I said, well, in my house, we had a lot of love, but we had a lot of rules.
Right.
So she said, well, just throw out some of the rules in your house, which I did. And so Rodale Books actually contacted me because once I did the rules, I think the paper got like over 50,000 hits for the rules.
Wow.
And so Rodale asked me to do for them a coffee table book. But I didn't know anything about publishing. I knew nothing, but I had a really good Jewish friend who was my writer on the project. And we got together, and thanks to her and her sister, we found out all of the mechanics of doing the book. And it just turned out to be something I never expected. I published with HarperCollins, and that same year that the book came out, I also signed with their Speakers Bureau. Wow.
I was able to take a look at your book, read a little bit of it, and I got to tell you, a lot of the rules that you have inside of that book reminds me of my mom.
Ooh, I am really old.
She is as well. Growing up, it was 3 boys and a girl, and she raised us alone. And she ruled with an iron fist. But there was always love there. And there were certain things that she instilled inside of me. And I tried to instill those things inside of my 4-year-old son. And those things are extremely important. And I take them with me every single day. But let's get back to your book. Let's talk a little bit about some of the parenting that you have to do. Is parenting a little bit different now that your kids are successful And, especially, with Chris Rock being such an iconic figure, do you have to kind of change it up a little bit?
No, I'm standard, and Chris will tell you that when he walks in my house, he's just another child. And one thing is, I don't see success as the money or the fame or any of that stuff. The success is that with everything he has been given, with all these blessings, he's still a really good, down-to-earth person.
That's great.
And that's all I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I just wanted to raise good people.
Right.
I wanted to raise kids that not only, did well for themselves, but knew that to whom much is given, much is required.
Right.
So you really have to be able to reach out, and you really have to be able to help others. It's only a blessing if you pass it on.
Yeah.
Only a blessing if you pass it on.
I was listening to an interview that you did with someone, and you were telling a story about when Chris was on the show Saturday Night Live. And after the show was over, there was a custodian that came around and cleaned up. And, one day that custodian came up to you and, gave you high praise and told you a story about how Chris took the time out to thank him. And I think about that because, when you mention the name Chris Rock, he's a legendary figure in the world of comedy. Everyone pretty much knows who he is. And the fact that, he can take the time out to thank someone, like the custodian, that just tells you the type of upbringing that he have, the things that was instilled inside of him to, not look at himself as, oh, I'm up here and this person is down here, but to put everyone on an equal field. And that is something that had to be instilled inside of him. And that comes from you. So just thought that story was absolutely remarkable. And, I appreciate you for sharing that story so we can be able to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because one thing I've always taught them is you treat everybody the same.
Yeah.
Whether they're dignitary, whether they're janitor, no matter what they do, they all deserve the same respect.
Absolutely. No matter what walk of life, everyone deserves a certain level of respect. But let's talk a little bit about the TWLUM Gala. You will be the keynote speaker for the event on August 5th that will take place in Myrtle Beach. What was the thought behind that? How did that come together? And what made you decide to become the keynote speaker for this event, the Gala?
And I've always worked with juveniles. I worked with the Marine Institute in Georgetown for a while. Things that we can do to keep them from going the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And so when I got the opportunity to meet with him one Saturday, and I saw what he was doing, and I saw the type of children that he was working with, I was really impressed with him and his program. And I mean, I follow him even though I'm in New York and he's there. I follow what he's doing. Like, he takes the kids on these trips and,
right.
and he exposes them to things that they would not be exposed to. And that's so important.
Right.
And so that was why when he asked me, would I keynote this event, I said, no matter what, I'll be there.
Yeah, shouts out to Mr. Tyron Wilson. He's an amazing individual. I had opportunity to talk to him last week and talk to him a little bit about the gala, of course, but also just the things that he does in the community and why he decided to dedicate himself to the youth within the community. And you need individuals like Mr. Wilson. You know, he gives these young youth opportunities to see a side of life that they probably wouldn't get opportunity to do so. You know, taking them on college tours and showing them a completely different world. You know, I could think of an individual, a man by the name of Charles Alexander. When I was growing up in New Orleans, he was kind of doing the same things Mr. Wilson was doing. And, you know, because of him, you know, I was able to be introduced to HBCUs, and I was able to be introduced to my alma mater, Jackson State University. So it's absolutely amazing what he does with the youth and how he dedicates his life to them. But we're definitely looking forward to the gala that's going to be taking place on August 5th. And we look forward to hearing your speech. I know you're going to be able to move so many people with your words. And I just want to say to you, Mrs. Rock, thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us a little bit about your book and also the gala. And we know that you're going to have an amazing speech lined up. Can't wait for that.
Well, thank you. I'm hoping it will be.
It will be. I know it will be. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Rose Rock, be sure to check out her book that is entitled Mama Rock's Rules, 10 Lessons for Raising a House Full of Successful Children. Thank you once again, Mrs. Rock, and we look forward to everything that you have down the road.
And thank you so much for having me.